And welcome to the Gay Liberation Network here on CAN TV. I'm your host, Andy Thayer, and with us today is Cathy Kelly of Voices for Creative Nonviolence. Thank you so much, Cathy.
Thank you, Andy. Good to be here with you today.
As you saw from the intro, we were going to be doing a program on the Israeli siege of Gaza. And many people in the United States here don't know just what an awful tragedy the people of Gaza are undergoing right now. Gaza is a land area that's about 60% that of the city of Chicago. It has about, I believe it's 1.8 million people crammed into this little area that they not only have to live in like us city dwellers here in Chicago do, but that's their agriculture, that's all their hinterland, that's their power supply, that's everything to make an urban society run. And yet this is an area virtually without any of the infrastructure because it's been bombed by the Israelis. Power, sewage, clean water, clean food. And the United Nations has come out with a report last year saying that sometime next year, Gaza will probably be virtually uninhabitable. Now, Cathy, you've been to Gaza. You've been doing solidarity work with the people of Palestine for many years. Say a few words about what's going on with this humanitarian tragedy that's unfolding right now.
Well, it is so hard for us to imagine being told that where you live could become uninhabitable a few months from now. But not only do they deal with all of the privation and the state of siege, but there's always the concern. Maybe the Israelis are going to pick this week to start clobbering us again with a terrible bombardment. And in fact, Andy, I haven't been in Gaza since 2013. I'm banned from entering Israel, and it's not very easy to get into Gaza. But when we went in, I'm going to date myself a bit, but back in 2009, I was in a hospital emergency room. I was there for the end of what was called Operation Cast Lead bombing. President Obama had just been elected, and we thought maybe he'll speak out. But in fact, he didn't. And I remember people saying for 22 days the world watched. And so I'm in this hospital emergency room, and I meet a medical doctor from Lakeview, Palestinian, who was volunteering. And I said, well, what do you want me to say when I go back to your neighborhood? And he said, well, tell people about the dense inert metal explosive bombs. They lacerate people's limbs. Tell them about white phosphorus. And then he stopped and he said, no, I'm completely wrong. Just you tell them that it was American taxpayer money that paid for these weapons. So here we are in Chicago, where Boeing is supplying massive weaponry to the government of Israel, the Israeli Defense Forces, and most people in the Chicago area would have a hard time knowing that because the mainstream media probably won't tell us.
And we're going to get up on our screen here. Sorry to those watching on Facebook Live. Say a few words about these pictures that we've got up on the screen here.
For instance, in 2009, once every 3 minutes, a bomb exploded from 11 at night till 1 in the morning, and then again between 3 and 6 in the morning. And I know nothing about ballistics, really, but after a while I could tell. Oh, that was an Apache helicopter firing a Hellfire missile. Oh, that was a 500-pound bomb dropped by an F-16. And the reason I was able to distinguish because the children taught it to me.
This is what kids learn. And you look at those pictures on our screen there. Not only do you see the devastation of the buildings in the background, but you look at the foreground. This is an area that's been bombed many times before. All the windows in the foreground are blown out from previous bombardments.
The roads are unnavigable, really.
And this has been basically at least yearly occurrence in Gaza that Israel drops these bombs in response to some alleged provocation. And if you read the New York Times, it's always Palestinians did this and then Israelis did that. But actually, more often than not, it's the Israelis, quote unquote, starting it. And the starting it right now has been, for many years, has been the literal starvation and blockade of the people of Gaza. How would we feel here in Chicago if we're living in an area 60% the size of Chicago, and yet another power was blocking all access of food, of water, and deciding what gets in, what gets out.
And in terms of what gets out, I mean, the sewage is so impossible to process that there are now the equivalent of 43 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of sewage going off the coast of Gaza into the Mediterranean. And it's a hellish place in which to live. And people look at the elections coming up in Israel and think, oh, will that be the pretext for another huge bombardment? And it's the world's largest open-air prison. People have nowhere to go. And here we are in Chicago, having a chance to tell people in Gaza that we aren't looking away completely. And that's the reason why a number of people have been trying to say, how can we break the siege of Gaza?
Yeah, yeah.
One way of doing that has been through actually sailing, trying to sail right into the Gaza harbor. Well, that hasn't always been successful. A few boats have gotten through, but I was part of an international flotilla, and the people that have been such persistent organizers have said, well, let's have flotillas in the United States to help raise awareness for next year's 2020 International Flotilla.
And we're going to be talking about just how you can get involved in that in just a few minutes. But before we do so, again, I want to get a few more pictures up on your screen here. You look at this devastation, this older man looking out on what was presumably previously his neighborhood, and all the buildings around have just been totally obliterated, where presumably thousands of people previously lived. The poverty rate in Gaza is now over 50% of the population. So we're not only talking about a city the size that's 2/3 the size of Chicago in landmass, but we're also talking deep impoverishment. Think 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 Englewoods, all crammed together, all people prevented from going in and out, the basic needs of their lives, electricity, sewage, and so forth, just cut off.
Farmers and fisheries. I can remember people who were collecting oranges in an orange grove, and then they said that their hands started to itch and burn, and so a doctor said, whatever you do, don't touch those oranges again. They might be covered with white phosphorus. And he said, really, we don't know all that was used against us. But imagine the fisher people, when they try to go out just to get fish for food, and never mind being able to build up an industry, cannons of water are fired at them, and many fishermen and fisherwomen have lost their lives. And it's a desperate situation economically. And when people have used tunnels in order to get food and spare parts and equipment in, then the tunnels are bombed, and what's said is, well, you're bringing in weapons here. Well, if you were to build a tunnel to bring in the D9 bulldozers, the F-16 aircraft, the
all manufactured by the United States,
you'd have to have a tunnel the size of the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
But we don't see that because somehow it's considered to be normal that the United States should arm Israel. $3 billion is a conservative estimate per year. And meanwhile, the Israelis are never submitting themselves to International Atomic Energy Association.
And they've got nuclear weapons.
Nuclear weapons.
Yes.
So
yes.
It's a time of grave injustice. And, we want to work on a flotilla here in Chicago. And I'll tell you, it's a bit contradictory because kayaks and canoes and electric boats seem like fun.
Yeah,
and this isn't intended to be fun. But
Yeah,
so we'll read the names of children that were killed in 2014, but we won't have enough time over the course of 2 hours or during 2 hours of demonstrating in front of Boeing to read all of the names.
Well, and it's important to note that people aren't just victims, that in incredibly desperate circumstances, people are resisting. I'm putting up on our screen now a picture of the Great Return March. Some believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's 70% of Gazans are refugees, i.e. they were expelled from their homes in quote-unquote Israel proper, and crowded into this, what's been described as an open-air prison called Gaza. And so people a bit over a year ago began launching what was termed the Great Return March. They wanted to return to their homes from which they and their parents had been evicted. And this picture up here, they're braving tear gas and sniper fire. And the incredible bravery of Gazans in doing these actions. And there you have on your picture some of the Israeli snipers. And I've got a few statistics on that. According to the UN Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, on March 22nd, 2019, 195 Palestinians, including 41 children, were killed, while close to 29,000 people have been injured since the start of the Gaza Return March. And here you see some more Israeli snipers literally picking off people. They have, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health, have killed at least 3 medics and 2 journalists, clearly marked people observing and helping the marchers. Here you see a picture of a medic who was severely injured. And so this is a totally preventable human rights tragedy, and it's being done with United States funds.
And then keep in mind for Palestinians living in Gaza who survive these terrible attacks but maybe become people who have had limbs amputated. Mm-hmm. It's just not the case that it's easy to get a prosthesis or that it's easy to get treatment, even though the doctors and the healthcare professionals are very, very skilled. They just don't have the resources any longer, again, because Gaza has been kept under siege. And how is that siege accomplished? Again, we have to look to companies like Boeing that produce the weapons, the combat littoral ships that go along the coastline, the harpoon ships. There's so much that implicates many, many people working in defense capacities in the United States, but also people having anything to do with United States governance, I think, have to be held accountable.
Yeah, well, and that's a very good point, because this funding of this terror, and that's the proper term for it, I believe, is terror, has gone under both Republican and Democratic administrations. President Obama dramatically increased aid to Israel, and Trump has done the same. And it's happened administration after administration after administration. You look at the huge field of Democratic candidates, some 24, and virtually all of them have one way or another assisted the U.S. military machine by voting for these war budgets. The House just did it, I believe, the other week. They voted for the latest appropriation bill for the armed forces, and you can count Senators Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, and all the rest of them in supporting that. And yet they say that they're not warmongering like the Republicans, and yet their very votes prove otherwise. And I think we have to look at how wars and war funding have been stopped in the past, and that's why the great example of the anti-Vietnam War movement is one that today's generation needs to relearn, because that war was stopped thanks to the efforts of the Vietnamese, in this case would be the Palestinians, a worldwide anti-war movement, and including people in the armed forces refusing to fight. Now, we need desperately a strong anti-war movement, because that's how the Vietnam War was ultimately ended. And that's how I believe, in spite of all this plethora of Democratic candidates promising us the sun, moon, and stars, that's how we're going to stop this barbarous aid to the strangulation of Gaza.
And I think it's good to assert that there is no rational discussion to be had about solving the social problems that we face, much less solving the problems that are caused in Gaza and throughout the West Bank. There's no rational discussion to be had unless we tackle the huge challenge of dismantling the United States military machine, the military-industrial congressional media complex. And you're right, you don't hear people that are stepping up to the podium and saying, I'm going to debate important issues. You don't hear them starting right off the bat with that being their commitment. And that's what we have to hold people to. If they want to say that they're going to represent a better future for the United States, then they can't sidestep the matter of war and warmongering and creating of our current situation a permanent warfare state.
Well, and the quote-unquote best of the candidates offer a candy store. Free college tuition, wiping out student debt, free health care, etc., which is all great stuff. I think any human being that cares about other human beings would say, well, these are very good ideas and we're a very wealthy society. But there's a reason why we've got fifth-rate health care in terms of its delivery to people, fifth-rate public transportation, unaffordable higher education, schools that don't have books and teachers that have got ridiculous teacher-to-pupil ratios, is because we have this enormous military machine that's funding things like the atrocities that were up on our screen here a little bit earlier. And until we start holding all of these candidates of both parties accountable for this military spending, they can promise us anything. And if we're stupid, we'll believe it.
And so we have to look at the double standard as well. The United States counts as its allies Saudi Arabia and Israel, two of the countries with some of the worst human rights violations. And certainly, as we focus on Gaza in the stretch between July 18th to 20th, that's one of the education realities we hope to accomplish. Somebody who himself grew up in Gaza, Jihad Abu Salim, will be speaking along with retired Colonel Ann Wright. And Ann is one of the main coordinators of the international flotilla effort. And certainly from Jihad, we'll learn what it's been like to have family members living in Gaza and reading the newspapers and getting the updates here. But of course, he gets updates from his family every day. And we hope that that will inspire anybody in the audience or anybody who reads about them, hears about them in media, to come to Boeing and
I'm going to cut you off there a little bit, Cathy, because I'd like to just recap what's happening beginning next Thursday. At Thursday, the opening event of this Gaza Freedom Flotilla series of activities. There's going to be an event at the Grace Place, 630 South Dearborn Street, right south of the Loop, 6:30 p.m. Thursday, July 18th. You mentioned Colonel Ann Wright. You mentioned
Jihad Abu Salim.
Jahab Abu Salim. They're going to be speaking at this event 6:30 p.m. Thursday, July 18th. Again, 6:30 South Dearborn Street. The next day, then.
And let me just say that
Yes.
we will have refreshments, and they're free of charge, thanks
Very
to
good.
the very fine catering of a nearby place. We do hope people will bring others who maybe aren't so familiar with the issues. There's a great group of folks endorsing this, but we want to reach as many people as possible. So the next day.
The next day, then, coming up on your screen now, we're taking it to Boeing.
Well,
Gaza.
let's just flip it a little bit. If
Thank you.
people are free at 11:30, you know, inside the Ogilvy Transportation Center building, up on the 30-something floor, is the Israeli consulate. And the Israeli consulate is representative of the government of Israel. I know that our Palestinian friends are just frustrated, don't even want to ask anything of a group they've learned to basically mistrust. But we do believe that they should be put on notice that we're aware of what the abuses and the murderous behavior have been. So we'll be outside of there. We'll be in silence for a time, and then there will be some remarks, and then we'll move over for a 12 noon gathering outside of Boeing Corporation.
Okay, and that again begins 11:30 a.m. Friday in front of the Ogilvy Transportation Center
At 500
West Madison,
Madison,
and then moving over to
Right.
Boeing. And then on Saturday, coming up on your screen.
And maybe I could just say at
Yeah.
Boeing, we will be reading out the names of children that have been killed. We've got puppets and palm cards to pass out, and it'll be a fairly lively action, and some may be engaging in nonviolent civil disobedience.
Great. And then you're taking it to the actual river. tell us about the Saturday event, the Gaza Freedom Flotilla on the Chicago River, Cathy.
Well, I think the International Flotilla organizers would have liked it if we'd gotten a yacht out on Lake Michigan. And we said, well, we really don't know very many people with yachts, but kayaks or canoes or electric boats we could do. So it'll be a flotilla of, right now we're thinking 10 people in kayaks spelling out our message, Free Gaza, each with individual signs, and then at least 3 electric boats that I'm aware of with activists. And then thanks to the Gay Liberation Network, we have a really wonderful sign that says, Israel, stop killing Palestinians. And people in Gaza are Palestinians. They want us to understand that there's a lot of solidarity throughout the region. And the message for the flotilla will be carried on the water, but also on the bridges overhead. So there will be opportunities with music and with chants and with procession to keep this message going. And we hope, again, that somehow through social media, people in Gaza will know that in various parts all across the United States, people are undertaking these kinds of actions, wanting to express our solidarity, our remorse, and our desire to hold ourselves accountable.
And that begins at 11 a.m. at the Lake Street Bridge over the Chicago River. It should be a very creative and interesting event in a way to symbolize, and we will be filming it. We'll be live streaming, we'll be filming, so that by hook or by crook, the people of Gaza will know that they don't stand alone. And so please come out to that series of events beginning next Thursday, 6:30 p.m. at Grace Place, 637 South Dearborn. We just have a handful of minutes here left. Cathy, what do you think is the most important thing that people here in the United States should know about what's going on in Gaza?
Well, I go back to the doctor from the emergency room who said United States taxpayer money is paying for these weapons. And, in some ways it's almost as though the generals in the United States can experiment with these hideous weapons. And all of this exacerbates the possibility of even wider war and greater dangers. And yet the people in Gaza have year in, year out, as you said, try to engage in resistance and say, we will not submit. And this is an exceedingly brave thing to do, because the message that the United States government has communicated since you and I were teenagers, Andy, has been steadily, if you do not submit to the will of the United States government and our perceived national interests, we as a government will eliminate you. Witness Iraq. Witness so many broken
Witness the
places.
Illinois Black Panthers.
Sure.
Yeah,
And so for people to say, no, we're still not going to submit. We want to regain our sense of dignity and translate that on to our children. That's a great gift to the world.
So just before we wrap up here, I wanted to call people's attention to a few other very important activities coming up just in the next few days. First, tomorrow at 11:30, actually 11 a.m. I should say, at Daly Plaza, 50 West Washington Street. There's going to be a huge, huge protest to denounce the Trump administration's attacks on refugees and immigrants. The Trump administration, according to a New York Times article that popped the other evening, is threatening a series of raids beginning on Sunday. And so it is very, very important that we have a huge turnout this Saturday, 11 a.m., Daly Plaza. Thousands of people are apparently going to be showing up to this. If social media is any indication, get down there early, make your voice heard, and let's resist. Let's actually do the kinds of resistance that stopped the initial Muslim bans by people flooding to the airports at the start of that jerks, I could use worse language, administration. And then on Monday, the so-called Right to Life is going to be bombarding Chicagoans with their pictures of bloody fetuses and other total distortions of what abortion means in this country. Fortunately, there is going to be a pro-choice counter-protest demanding that we preserve and expand abortion rights for all who choose to avail themselves of them. And that's going to be at 4 p.m. again in front of the Ogilvy Center on Monday, July 15th, 500 West Madison Street. So, Cathy, could you say a few words about how people can get in touch with Voices for Creative Nonviolence and the sort of things that you do to help make this a better world?
Oh, well, we'd certainly welcome people to come by and visit. We're at 1249 West Argyle Street.
In the Uptown neighborhood.
Yeah, that's right. And we do have a website, vcnv.org. Info at vcnv.org is a good way to be in touch with our email. And we've just recently had 2 people come back from Iran. They're both my housemates, and they've been so instrumental both in raising awareness about Iran and have thrown themselves into lots of burning the midnight oil, getting this flotilla ready. So it's an interesting crew.
Okay, and with that, I'm afraid we're going to be wrapping things up here. Again, Cathy Kelly, Voices for Creative Nonviolence. This is Andy Thayer with the Gay Liberation Network. Thanks for watching.